Hello, so I do believe that we are now live. So thank you to everyone for joining us on the discussion today. So my name is Mark Giles. I'll be your host kicking things off before I hand over to Celia Gasolin, who is our moderator and leading today's discussion. We also have the following panelists: Tyrell Kibodo, who is Director R&D Business Relationship Management for Regeneron Pharmaceutical; Julia Pence, Portfolio Manager, GSK Vaccines R&D Digital Transformation Office; Simon Cook, Research Scientist for Dow; and Viral Vyas, who is Lead IT Business Partner, Bristol Myers Squibb. And finally, to formally introduce our moderator, Celia Gasolin, who is Marketing Communications Manager for LabTwin. So, of course, it goes without saying, very excited to have everyone here today. I hope you find it a really interesting discussion. So the session will actually focus on digital transformation of R&D labs, and more specifically, how to predict the impact of innovative technologies on business goals. So before we start, I'd just like to remind all attendees you've joined in listen-only mode, so that means that you are muted. There are various areas within the system which I'd encourage you to use. So there's a section for Q&A, so you can log your questions for the host, the moderator, or panelists. Drop them in the questions box, and we'll take a look at them towards the end of the session, and obviously we'll answer them appropriately. You also get the opportunity to watch the session again, so we do have a playback feature, and we will ensure that everyone receives a copy of the session post-event. And finally, feedback's really important to us as we develop our portfolio around this topic area. So I would encourage you to fill out the survey post-event as well. This really will enable us to shape future events and find topics that are relevant to you and really ensure that we deliver maximum value to the audience. So without further ado, I will now turn you over to Celia, who is our moderator for the session.
Hi, thank you very much, Mark. I'm very excited to moderate this discussion today on the different strategy to ensure consistent digital transformation with the business goals. And to understand better each panelist's position, as job title don't say it all, I would like them to introduce themselves briefly, who they are and what are their role in the organization. Viral, do you want to start it off?
Yes, hi, good afternoon, good morning, everybody. My name is Viral Vyas. I'm with Bristol Myers Squibb. I'm an IT business partner, which basically means I'm set on the IT side, but very closely aligned to the business organizations and the business groups. And I try and deliver key strategies, IT strategies that actually enable the business processes. And currently I'm working on business processes around global biospecimen imaging management. And that's about it.
Thank you, Viral. Tyrell?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Afternoon. Tyrell Kibodo, similar to Viral, I'm a business partner between IT and the business, and so really I translate back and forth, business requirements into IT requirements and vice versa. I support discovery research, several areas in discovery research. One of the main areas I support is preclinical manufacturing and process development. This is our scale-up type of facility that really comes up with the development of new drugs that we're looking to get into clinical trials and into the market. And currently we're working on really kind of what we call Industry 4.0 objectives. As we're scaling up that facility, we're doing a large expansion, and we're trying to include more automation, both on the process automation side as well as the laboratory informatics side. Thanks.
Thank you, Tyrell. Julia, do you want to go on?
Hi, Julia Pence. I work for GSK Vaccines, and I sit on the R&D side. So I'm the R&D person that I partner with people like Tyrell and Viral in our IT organization. I'm the portfolio manager for our R&D digital transformation, which is a new role that I started about in January. So we have again, also starting in January, a strategy for digital transformation with a couple of pillars. And so I help manage looking at, from a global perspective there. What are we doing? How are all the individual projects lining up against the strategy? And then, so what does that mean we then need to do with the projects? Do we need to start new ones? Do we need to stop some that don't line up? And then also part of looking after that portfolio is trying to figure out how do we communicate the business impact of what we're doing?
Thank you, Julia. Simon?
Hi, I'm Simon Cook from Dow Chemical. I have a role where I am a solution manager within Dow that works within the digital transformation project. So I lead one of those pillars that Julia was talking about with a focus particularly on how to get data out of R&D lab computers and how to organize that data and how to push it to different systems. I have other responsibilities on integration of systems such as LIMS, high throughput systems, and other things. So you could kind of say my real specialty area is probably more informatics and data management and data movement.
Thank you, Simon. And I can also briefly introduce myself. So I'm Sia Gesla. I'm a neuroscientist researcher from background, and now I'm handling the scientific communication in LabTwin. And actually at LabTwin, we are developing a voice-powered digital lab assistant for scientists to enable a hands-free capturing of the data from the bench through voice recognition and connection to the lab digital platforms for either pushing the captured data, for example, or querying information. And as we have been working with several pharma and chemical companies, we could observe a lot of different approaches in the process of implementing new technology to impact business objectives. And that's why we think it would be very interesting today to exchange on the different practices. So to get started, let's go quickly around the table again and hear about the current R&D business goals for digital transformation. So Simon, let's go on. What are the top objectives at Dow regarding digital transformation?
Really, the top objective with our digital transformation is about speed to market. There's a lot of discussion about how you do it and all the different systems you can put in place. But really, it's this funnel that you're showing is how do we go from something that takes paper and people and lots of time and energy to a long time to get a new product to market, to how do we speed up that innovation? How do we get our data faster? How do we build those systems, reduce the people time, people effort, so that we can redirect those people to work on more projects, which means we get more through our funnel and everything moves faster to market. And that's kind of our thread as to why we're working on this kind of digital transformation. And if you think on top of that, once you collect that data and you're starting to do the traditional process is moving faster, you have a whole platform of data where you can start to look and say, well, did we miss something? So that's when your AI, ML type operations come into play, is how do you look across that data and find something new?
Thank you. Gerald, do you have similar goals or a different one at BMS?
No, I mean, at BMS, we have similar goals in terms of digital transformation. I think at BMS, we sort of look at, clinical trials, which is the area that I'm in, as producing a lot of data. And really, pharmaceutical companies traditionally produce a pill, but behind that pill is that data. And really, that's what you're sort of marketing to your stakeholders in the end of the day, which is the data that stands behind that one pill that the patient is going to take. And so the data is really a key asset that we want to focus on. And our focus is to make sure, like Simon described, to understand what that data is telling us. How do we actually get insights from that data? And all the digital transformations that we do are focused on trying to get that insight from that data to make our decisions better, to make our medicines better, to make sure that we're identifying the right kind of cohorts or patients that can actually benefit from the medicines. So that's been really sort of the driver, at least on the clinical space. Now, I come from the R&D space as well, so I've had background in discovery as well. And again, that data is very important to try and bridge the gap between what you've discovered in the lab and how do you translate those discoveries into the clinic. And the bridge between the two really resides in that understanding of that data. So that's been our key focus, trying to get better insights from that data.
Thank you. Julia, how is it at GSK? Do you have business goals around digital transformation?
So we're still developing the specific goals. I mean, faster is definitely one of them, although in the R&D space, also increasing our probability of technical success is another huge one. So, the pillars I mentioned, we have 4 of them. One is for what we call antigen design. So when we decide that we want to make a vaccine for a particular disease, how do we select the best antigen that'll be a good vaccine? And so that's in our, focused on our preclinical R&D labs. And then we have what we call digital development. So that's how do we, in the development, so the people who are trying to figure out, the preclinical has decided this is the antigen, but we need to figure out, while clinical trials are going on, we need to make it for the clinical trials, and then we need to figure out how are we going to make it at commercial scale. So bringing digital tools there, and also that's got some aspects of trying to use some of our historical data to see if we can predict, based on what we know from the past, how to do it better in the future. Then we have what we call seamless launch. So one of the big places that you have, difficulty sometimes is moving it out of R&D into manufacturing. So can we bring digital tools to help us with that? And then underneath it all, we always visually present it that way. We have what we call enabling data systems and practices. So that's really kind of a lot of what you've got on this slide of, get all the data out of the equipment, out of the machines, get everything, stop using paper. And there's always an asterisk on that paper also includes stuff like Excel and PowerPoint that you can't actually really use. So, those are really our goals. And exactly how do we translate that into a business impact is still something we're trying to work on the best way to do that.
Thank you. And Terrell, how is it at Regeneron?
Yeah, I think similar to what everyone else said, right? I mean, our goal is to get, drugs to patients faster, right? So in order to do that, a little bit different than Viral, I'm a little bit more upstream in the early discovery and research space. So, what we're looking at is really efficiency and automation, right? To really enable scientists to be at the bench more often and to spend less time curating and curating data and more time analyzing that data. In order to do that, right? I mean, we're looking at, how do we enable them, through technology to do some of this manual work that they do today, similar to everyone else, right? They tend to use, Excel and PowerPoint and other tools. And so we're trying to come up with some standardized tools that people can utilize in their data analysis, right? To really enable the process to work faster. Similar to what Julia said, we have two different processes we look at in early research and discovery and preclinical development. And one of them is we call is a platform where we can get things into some trials pretty quickly. We call our early stage development, but actually most of our work actually occurs in our late stage, and that's projects and programs that take us a year or more to develop over time. So we work a lot in that space in terms of enabling modeling and other tools. But we have a big, really, I think one of the bigger issues that we're trying to overcome is really the integrate all of the point-to-point integrations of systems and the aggregation of data. So that's, we're able to collect data pretty effectively, but getting data out is very difficult. And we still suffer from a lot of point-to-point integrations where we're trying to look at something that's a more common type of integration where all the data can reside and coexist, and then we can aggregate the data we need to aggregate together. So we have research data, and we're kind of unique because we span research and we span manufacturing operations. So we have data on both sides of the house, and it's really a burden today to try to aggregate that data together to get insights.
Thank you. Yeah, data integration, I think that's a common challenge I hear about in general in all the conferences. So then, now that we have the business goals, they need to be addressed by starting specific projects, such as implementing a new technology, for example. So where does this initiative come from? Is it a top-down initiative from an analysis of the current status, or is it rather bottom-up from user demands? Viral, at BMS, so it seems that you're doing first the analysis of the process, right?
Yeah, so there are different approaches that we take at BMS. I think first and foremost, it's all about understanding what the business is driving towards. What is the business strategy? So in this case, for instance, Global Biospecimen Imaging Management, they have a set of business goals that they've outlined for not only this year, but they have a roadmap of 2 to 3 years. And so as IT business partner, what we try to do is that really understand what those objectives are and identify the needs that are against those objectives, and then to identify how do we actually figure out a technology solution that meets those needs. So what we try to do is actually align our IT strategy with the business strategy to make sure that whatever we deliver actually is in line with what the business is expecting, right? That upfront, we try to build that alignment so that as we progress with our business cases, as we start doing the analysis, there's actually buy-in from the top down in terms of our alignment, right? It becomes very transparent to the users, to our partner community, that what we're trying to accomplish is in line with their business objectives. So it makes that conversation go a lot faster. And then there's this whole concept around the bottom up, like you mentioned, right? So we tend to do that as well, because very often we find that there are things that we can hear from the bench, for instance, or things that we hear from the scientists that are in the field. And those are things that we can sort of translate into objectives for our not only delivering technology and digital solutions, but also sort of impacting some of the strategic directions that the business is taking. So it's a combination of things that we do.
Okay, thanks. Julia, how is it at GSK? Is it also this combination? Is this rather coming from the top, from the bottom?
So historically, we've had a lot of bottom-up stuff. We're trying to bring a bit of structure with this new transformation strategy, and the first thing to do was really look around and say, what is happening? What is going on? And a real problem we found with these bottom-up solutions is that we are really good at spotting a problem, at doing a proof of concept, at delivering something to a sort of an alpha stage that's really, really great. We are really bad at then driving from there into actually adopting it across the entire relevant, whether that's all across R&D, across a specific subset of labs, or moving it from a lot of the things we do on the sort of in the development side, to really get an impact, you've got to get them out of R&D into manufacturing, and that's where we fail. So we've been really having an emphasis lately on trying to figure out, okay, how do we go from these proof of concepts, these alpha stage, this great stuff we're doing, how do we get it to scale? Because that's when you can actually make an impact. These little, alpha stage point solutions to things, they are great, but they are not going to make the kind of impact that actually, is going to get especially like senior leadership to understand why this is important.
Okay, thanks. And Terry, like at Regeneron, I think you start with the top-down approach, right? You start with the business case before scouting the tech. Am I right?
Yeah, correct. We similar to the other participants, right? We also really, my job is really kind of manage the portfolio with the business. So we look at the business capabilities and which capabilities the business wants to set goals and enabling those capabilities, and we try to match technology solutions to those. I mean, we also work from the bottom up, because once we identify this portfolio of projects, we work with our business partners to prioritize those projects and then allocate appropriate resources towards those, and really trying to find and implement solutions. And similar to Julia, I say we have a term said we're really good at bad implementations historically, and really that was because I look at really kind of our company Regeneron was they were a startup for about 25 years, so there wasn't a large IT organization, and so even though our science is very cutting edge and very innovative and very leading, our technology solutions are probably behind that curve, maybe 5 to 10 years behind. And so there were some decisions in the past that they didn't, because of whatever reasons, right? They selected technology that wasn't scalable, that was going to be hard to support moving forward. So we're probably in the same arena with, I'm assuming, many other people, that we have to look at these current solutions in place, and it's very difficult to replace those in time, right? Because if we were starting out more greenfield, it'd be much easier to select the proper technology solution, through proof of concept, similar to what Julia stated as well, and implement those. But we have to both replace something and selecting something new. So we do use bottom-up and top-down approaches in both cases where, for instance, today we've had a laboratory information management system in place for about 5 years, and we're not sure scaling to our new facility. So we're now going in and doing proof of concepts on some additional systems to see, do we have the right system and are we using it in the right way?
Yes, thanks. So a lot of challenges still to face. Simon, how is it at Doe? Do you also do a big assessment first or gather user requests rather?
I would say it's very similar to the other panelists, is that we have both approaches. So within the group that I work on, we have a set of architects who, including myself, we kind of look at what's out there and what the big gaps are, but at the same time, we also have the ground up approach, the talented scientists in our labs who are writing code to fix their short-term issue, and then we'll look at that code and what gaps that brings. So I could repeat everything the other panelists said, but the one thing I would really add to what they're saying is that bottom-up approach is super important for identifying gaps. Those guys are really talented at filling that point need, and then our job is to really take those gaps and say, okay, we can really see a trend here. How do we solve that trend without getting caught up in the technical debt of managing hundreds of point solutions that rely on spreadsheets, for instance, to go back to a previous comment. So that's really kind of our role, is to take those lab approaches, look at what's out there, look at the larger strategy and say, okay, how can we start to bring those systems together? And I would echo a lot of what Terrell, Julia, and Virial said about existing systems. That's a very important point, because you've got to design anything that's coming in to fit with your historical system. It's very, very difficult to overcome the inertia to take an existing long-term system and completely change it for another. And LIMS was a great example of that. And I think that's an area that is something that we're aware of, and we're trying to think when we do these top-down and bottom-up approaches. How can we be more agile? How can we make it more data-centric as opposed to system-centric? And that's a tough nut to crack.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone here can say that they are agile in their way of implementing new technology?
Yeah, I think most companies do follow agile. It just depends on which area. Some areas are probably better suited to doing agile than others. In cases where you actually need to validate the system, which is most cases in the clinical domain, agile is a little difficult because it just doesn't lend itself to build a validated system. But in case of research, actually, that's exactly the practice that we follow. Every project that we do, it sort of starts with this design thinking methodology to make sure that we're looking at the perspective of the user, from a user perspective, trying to build user-centric applications and technologies and tools, and then make sure that sort of all the teams that are involved in it are using agile as one of the methodology. Now, I will say that agile is a journey. It's not something that you can flip a switch and turn on. It just takes a long time for all teams involved to actually work in an agile methodology. And it's not just a project team that has to work in agile. It's actually your entire organization that has to be adept at that using agile, because the entire terminology and the functioning of how agile works is very different compared to waterfall, say.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, we use Agile as well, and we were recently working on a project where we're implementing scaled Agile, and one of the benefits of the scaled Agile is that we look at the whole portfolio, and more importantly, we look at the dependencies between the projects or the products that we have in place, and so we're trying to align, how we release different enhancements and things to those existing systems in place, as well as using it for projects going forward, and really, I think Simon brought up a very good point. Something that we do as well is that, part of what we do is we enable our scientists to do exactly what Simon says, write code and develop, short-term solutions, tactical solutions for business problems they're facing, and then we use that information to help better inform us on priorities and decisions we make on selecting really longer term, more scalable type of solution. So that it is a very important part of what happens, and even in the organization, even that's done in an agile fashion. So not only is our IT group that supports our business trained on agile, we actually train our scientists on agile as well.
Okay, thanks. So now that we have identified the gaps and gathered the user requests to test the new technology, what are the optimum strategy to test then this new technology? What do we have to pay attention to when we pick one? What are the challenges that we remain? I mean, there's some that have been shared already, but what are the important things to check before we implement a new technology? Julia, how is it at GSK? Do you compare several tech in parallel? Do you run POCs? How is it?
Yeah, it depends. It depends a lot on the particular project, for sure. Yeah, and sometimes it's something where we already have. One of the first things we do is try to figure out, do we have something else we can borrow, we can import. So with lab data capture and data management, we've got in our what we call technical R&D and vaccines. So the people who do, which is the process scale up piece, they started rolling out something they call capture data workflow that does this lab data capture of what is the scientist doing in the lab when they're carrying out their experiments, which involves this. It's a huge project. It involves also bringing barcoding into everything that they're ever going to touch and use, and scanner guns, so that they don't have to write down a serial number. They just beep 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 all the bottles and all of that. And we needed a similar solution then in our preclinical labs. And there was actually a little resistance to moving it over, because every scientist, and you get this, it's worst in the preclinical scientists, I find. They think that they do sometimes have a tendency to think that oh, what I do is so individualized and special, and we can't possibly apply any sort of standardization to it. And so the people management is a huge part of this as well, the change management. But we did get them to realize that actually they could get into this same system, possibly with a few modifications. We're just launching it with the idea of launching a pilot in one lab this year is the plan, and then to fully roll that out in preclinical next year. So sometimes we do try to see, can we borrow? Sometimes we will have, we'll want to think, okay, we need a solution. Let's compare some different things. We've got a project that's just starting up to look at that for very relevant to this, to look at hands-free manipulation in labs. What are the various, first, let's make sure we really understand what the users need. And that's really where they are right now. But then the next step will be, okay, now we understand the needs. What are the possible technologies that we could bring that could meet those needs? And then, take an understanding of that. And then I don't know exactly the criteria they'll use to select between them, but that's sort of how that will do. Sometimes there's a particular, we know what kind of technology we want to use, and so we just dive in to a proof of concept, or we'll do multiple proof of concepts in parallel if we aren't sure if it's going to work. So we've got some move into trying to do processing and microfluidics, and that's brand new technology. We really don't know if it'll work. So for the same process step, we may be testing 2 or 3 or more different ways to do it in microfluidics, with the idea that we'll pick the best one, or maybe certain ones will work in different types of conditions, things like that. So it's very project dependent, but it does almost always at least involve some sort of a proof of concept to show that it works, and then hopefully a scaling from there. But again, that's where we kind of have trouble.
Yeah, thank you. Simon, is it similar at Doe?
It's remarkably similar, and that's no real surprise, because a lot of the strategies for new technologies are really derived from a lot of people going out there, looking at the marketplace, seeing what's available. You'll do a proof of concept, you'll try and find your best fit for the organization, which isn't always necessarily the best technology, which is kind of a difficult thing for people to get after. I would echo a lot of what Julia said, in that it's very, very difficult to satisfy everybody. So for me, the key strategy here, and again, Julia mentioned a lot of this, is to find those scientists in the lab who are willing to work with you and to respond in a fast time scale, so you can really get these POCs in. You can test them. There's nothing worse than having a POC in place and then waiting 2 to 3 months for someone to have the time to test. So you really need to make sure you have that team and those enthusiastic individuals, both on the IT side and in the lab and the other parts of the organization that need to test, to really make sure that those POCs are thoroughly tested before you start moving to scale up into anything on a enterprise type scale. So rather than go on too long about and echo what Julia said, that's really the part I would aim is really how do we get those enthusiastic people to really work with us in the lab is the key one for me.
Terrell, do you have a process for that?
Yeah, I mean, similar to what Julia and Simon said, I mean, there's certainly a process, but what I would sort of, I'd put a different lens on it, right? So one lens is that these are new technologies that the scientific community or the clinical teams actually identify, and then they want to bring into BMS, which is great, right? Because they actually understand the problem better than we ever could. And they're actually looking at those technologies. But then the due diligence that we go through is to say, okay, well, we've identified the technology. Is it the right fit for our enterprise platforms? How does this actually gel with the overall architecture that we've got? And then how does this actually relate to the overall strategy that we've actually put in place, both the business strategy as well as the IT strategy, right? So those are the kind of things that we kind of go through. In terms of testing technology, these are users that are passionate about it, they've identified it, so there's really no burden on us to try and engage them. They're already engaged that way. The second component of this is that IT identifies the technology because we understand what the processes are. We sort of are looking across the enterprise and we can see that there's a certain set of technology that will fit multiple processes across the business. In that case, you really do have to do your due diligence to actually recruit key participants, like Julia mentioned, right? You have to identify those SMEs and those change agents that will actually work with you to test those new technologies out. And then in terms of testing, you have to really think about what is the business use case, or what is the business problem you're trying to solve with that. It's always about the why. Why are we doing this? So, why is this technology important to us? And if we are able to articulate that and we're able to describe that in a way that is receptive, then it makes that whole testing process a lot easier. And there are multiple ways of testing this, right? You can have incubators, you can have proof of concepts that you do, you have innovation teams that you have created that are actually testing out these technologies. So there are multiple ways to actually identify new technologies, test them. It's just going to be dependent on the situation that you're in to try and figure out what works the best.
Thanks. And at Regenero and Terrell, do you have also the innovation team dedicated? Do you have a similar process?
Yeah, we have a similar processes, and I'll just add to what some of the other panelists said. So, number one, we always start off with the business problem, right? That's really what drives us, is what business problem are we trying to solve? And then from a technology perspective, like some of the things we look at is we sort of have an approach where we say commercial over custom. So we try to look at commercial solutions first before we go to custom solutions. And once we kind of look at that, we also in tandem, we look at reuse first, if we can, similar to what Julia said, reuse something in the organization. SaaS next, so if we can get software as a service and hosted by someone, that helps us, because we don't have, probably as many people in IT as we would like to have or need to have to support the business always. So we look at SaaS first, then we look at cloud next. Is it something we can do ourselves in our cloud instance? And then last, we look at on-premises, right? Is it something that needs to be on-premise? So we kind of go through that process to try to understand, because not only do we have to implement this, we have to support this. So we always look at, COTS over custom, reuse, SaaS, cloud, on-premise. And then similar to what Julia and the other panelists mentioned, right? We do POCs and same thing. We try to do multiple POCs, at least 2 in parallel, to select the best product. Another approach we take is we try to at times implement what we call minimal viable product, right? That's really kind of using an agile an agile process to implement something that we can gain value out of quickly, and then we continue to iterate on that through what we call we use a plan, build, run process. So, you know, the build would be build that MVP, and then the run would be constantly iterate through that and make sure that we constantly enhance the products that we have that are part of our portfolio. And so, you know, again, that's what we do. And then similar to what Vero mentioned is that you got to have a business partner that supports you in this, right? So it can't be seen as this is an IT solution looking for a business problem. And so you have to have business partner support at the executive level and the team level, right? In order to have these SMEs that can test and try out the products, and you have to have that executive support. That's important going forward, because, you know, if it's seen as an IT project versus a business project, you know, it's probably going to be doomed.
Thanks. So now I think we arrived to the million-dollar questions. How do we measure then the success? How do we evaluate the impact on this new technology on the business goal? Yeah, do you want to go on this, and how is the method at BMS for this?
Yeah, I mean, so a key part of measuring success really begins at the beginning. When we identify, you know, really it's all about clearly identifying what the problem is. What is the business problem we're trying to solve? How is not that big a deal, because there are multiple ways of solving it. But if you implement that technology, what are the success criteria that you're going to hold yourself against? And that's actually the definition that goes into the business case that we propose, right? So in the business case, you have to clearly identify what are your key success measures that you're going to create. How are you going to measure those KPIs? What is the business outcome that you're actually going to look for? And the measurement of those criteria really depend, again, on the problem you're trying to solve. So as an example, if you're trying to solve a problem in trying to reduce a cycle time, well, their measure of success is going to be how quickly once you implement the technology, that cycle time actually go down. And there are multiple ways of measuring it, right? You can measure it via technology. You can measure it via looking at surveys. Or you can measure it in terms of dollars, in terms of, you know, the cycle time has gone down, your budget is coming down because of that, and so therefore there's an impact on that. There are other cases where measuring that success is actually a lot harder, and that's typically true within the more research environment and the discovery environment, because success in discovery is slightly different compared to success in the clinical domain, right? In discovery, it's maybe one lab or maybe 5 people that are actually focused on a problem. You're delivering a key capability to them, but how do you measure success? You know, you have to wait years in order to figure out whether what they're working on actually made it to the clinic, and that's not a good measure of success. So in that case, what we tend to do is actually focus more on not on the quantitative aspect, but more on the qualitative aspect of success, which is, did it improve the business process? Are we getting better data? Is the data usable by everybody? Is it, you know, fair data principles, right? Is it accessible? Is it easily reusable, etc., right? So we try and focus on those more qualitative skills on the research side. There are quantitative things that you can do, but it's a mix of things. You just have to look at the problem and figure out how you're going to measure it.
Yeah, Terry, do you have something similar at Regeneron? How do you quantify the impact? You're muted, I think. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yep. Yeah, it's very similar to what Vero mentioned. Is that, you know, we develop a business case, and one of the things we focus on that business case in the beginning is, you know, we collect, you know, high level requirements to understand that business case, but we focus a lot on the value statements, and so we really work with the business to try to, you know, identify quantitative values, right? So, you know, we try to focus on not things like just, hey, we want to increase efficiency, right? We want to quantify that efficiency to some degree if we can, even though we're in research, we still try to quantify that if possible. So, you know, we try to put some kind of a quantitative number to that. And so once we do that, we identify, you know, probably one or more different types of value or value streams, we may call them. Efficiency, return on investment, time saving, whatever. Those are some of the ones that we, reducing the amount of time to validate something. Those are some of the common ones we look at. And then once we kind of identify that, right, we try to set a baseline and measure those before we get started. How much time is this taking now? And so we establish that baseline. Then once we go through the project, right, we do an implementation. We come back somewhere between 3 to 6 months later, and we measure again. And so we measure and say, was that value achieved, right, compared to the baseline? So that's really kind of our approach is try to take a quantitative look. We also have qualitative as well, like Viral mentioned. But then we measure a baseline, and then after the project's implemented, we'll measure it really when it's implemented, but we also come back somewhere within 3, 6, 12 months and try to measure that again and make sure that we capture that value that we expected to capture based upon the original business case.
Thanks. So Julia, do you have also a way to measure KPI or success criteria at GSK? And Terry mentioned time savings. I know it's a sensitive matter somewhere else. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, we don't do this very systematically. This is something that I'm trying to now that we can look at the whole portfolio and just know what are we doing. Now we're trying to figure out, okay, how can we, how are all these projects measuring their success? How can we, roll that up into a single narrative? Yeah, I mean, definitely time saving of people is definitely one for a lot of these lab-based things. That can also then get very sensitive. At GSK in particular, in the last year or so, we've had quite a lot of layoffs. And so people are very sensitive about that, since it's hard for the scientists not to think, and to some extent they're correct to think this way, that, well, if you're saving me 10% of my time, does that mean that eventually you're going to cut down 10% of the scientists? And no matter how much all of us with the best of intentions can say, oh no, that's not the plan. The idea is we want you to be working on more useful things and not spending a bunch of time cleaning up Excel sheets. I mean, eventually at the end of the day, that may in fact be what does end up happening to some extent with that. So you have to be sensitive to a lot of those things. Another wrinkle in some of this that comes up that we're just starting to try to think about how we can deal with this is, especially when you look at projects that are focused on the development, what we call the technical R&D, you may have projects where the real value shows up when the vaccine gets to manufacturing, but quite a few of those vaccines never get to manufacturing, not because of anything we did in technical R&D, but because they failed in the clinical trials. So how do you take that into account if you're determining the success of your project when the vaccine project you were attached to got canceled because it failed its clinical trial? So you never developed any, you never actually delivered any value because you never went to manufacturing, but your project maybe still worked great, or your proof of concept was great. Maybe you need to find another vaccine. This is something we constantly struggle with, because innovative technologies, to get them moved through, the best thing to do is to attach them to a vaccine. Hopefully attach them to a high value project, what we call a must do. But then when those fail, you end up with some of these orphan technologies. So sort of how to deal with that is something else that we're still really trying to kind of figure out. But definitely, yeah, I mean, a lot of what's been said is the approach that we're trying to put in place.
Does anyone has a good answer to that? How to evaluate a technology when the project is not going up to the end of it?
No, that's certainly a tough one to try and tackle. I mean, my question actually, Julia, would be that these technologies that you're looking, is it possible to sort of transplant these technologies in the other domain, or they're so specific that they're actually geared towards that single vaccine? And if you can transplant them, then you can probably measure that efficiency in the other one.
Yeah, that's certainly what we try to do. It's also come up in another area I've gotten involved in recently, is where GSK is trying to meet some sustainability targets that we announced recently that are extremely ambitious. And so one of the things there is we're trying to embed eco-design in our development process. And how do you account for the carbon savings that you found for the vaccine that never went all the way to manufacturing? Right. So that group is trying to figure out what kind of targets can we give ourselves, both so that we're counting what did we actually deliver in terms of reduced carbon emissions, but at the same time also you don't want to discourage the people who put in a bunch of work on the project that got canceled by saying that that eco design didn't matter because the vaccine never went to market. So balancing all of this is tricky, but we're working on
it. Yeah. The other approach we have is I guess very similar, right? We say, because we're mainly large molecule, but we do small molecule as well. But a lot of shots on goal and fail fast, right? Is really in research. That's kind of the common term. Let's get a lot of shots on goal, and if we fail, let's fail fast.
Yeah, I would echo what Carol just said. Is that's exactly my comment. Is I'd sit in early stage research, and the faster you fail, the better it is actually. But you really need to cycle through those shots on goal. And what I'm really seeing, it's important to have those successes. It's important to have those drugs, molecules, polymers get through to manufacturing and be sold. That's great. But if you're in early stage research, you might have 20 shots before you get one through that really has the success. So the real measure when you're in that kind of scenario is how fast does it take you to get to the goal? Do you have to have 50 soccer matches to score 20 goals, or do you score 20 in one soccer match? And that's kind of where we want to try and push our measures, is more how fast you get there.
And Simon, your business goals are related really on data, increasing the data quality. So how do you assess this impact of a new technology on the data quality?
That's a really difficult one, and I think the real measure of that impact is to have people run the modeling, have people run their AI and ML models, and to give that immediate feedback to say, hey, your data is great and I don't see any issues, or to immediately say, hey, there's a little hole here, we need to fix this. So it's really part of that whole agile kind of technology, as you work with your modelers hand in hand to say, this is what I'm proposing, this is the kind of data system that we're trying to bring online. Is there any holes that I have here? Can you run some quick tests and a quick look at how that works, and feedback, and just let us know. Hey, you forgot to include, for example, the temperature on the process reactor that really impacts the crystallinity of my polymer, for argument's sake. And you really need to start adding that back into your data so that we can start to build those better models. So it's really having everyone involved in feeding back at all stages of the process. One of the points that I really wanted to interject too with measuring the success is build that in as you build your application. So it's so easy to build your application and then start to think about how you're going to measure your application. And that's really tough to do after the fact. But if you start to build it in right at the very start and think, okay, I have a LIMS system, that's probably the easiest that everyone uses. How many requests do I have per day? How many times do people enter the chemical as sample 1 versus a proper chemical name? How do I build that in as I'm building my system? It's kind of one of the key things we're starting to look at too.
Yeah, thanks. So Cyril, at Regeneron, you have a lot of mix, right, between research and data model directly. So do you manage to assess faster this impact on data quality?
Yeah, obviously in process development, we do a lot of modeling, but I think there's a kind of a maturity process where a lot of that's manual today, and we're working on automating those processes and really kind of getting into the AI ML space as well, where modelers spend less time with the putting together the models and such, and we can have some automation take place as well. So we do definitely in the area I'm in, process development, there's an an extreme amount of modeling going on, and we're working on optimizing the process for sharing that knowledge and information. And so one of the things we're working on is we have a project that's a data catalog where it goes out and looks at all the systems we have in place and the different type of data we're collecting, and exposes that to people to know that, hey, is there something out there that's similar to what I'm doing? So a lot of times what we start is we've made something in the past, and this new thing is like that other thing. And so how much can I find out about that other thing, and where do I go to get that information? And that's in silos today, right? If you look at it, it's in different areas of research and different people's file systems on their laptop or common file servers, maybe even in databases. And so we're putting together really a catalog to go out and kind of search our systems and pull all that data in, so people can ask those questions and say, hey, this is like something else that I know was done before. Who worked on that? What did they do? What information did we gather? What insights did we get from that? And they use that as a starting point for developing something new.
Thank you, Terrell. So now for the next 10 minutes, I want to move to the business case as a conclusion, but I'm going to take also the question from the audience, so feel free to shoot your question in the question box or in the chat directly, and I will incorporate them to the discussion. So how do we make a successful business case then? What are the good practices? What are the common mistakes? Julia, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, certainly making sure you try to focus it, to the people who are making the decision. So, really thinking about who is making the decision, what is going to be persuasive to that person, or if it's a group of people, how do you persuade them? What is it that they care about? How do they like to receive information? That's definitely a good one. Tie it to the goals that they are really interested in, that's most important to them. And try to think about what are the questions that they're going to ask. Can I make sure that I've answered them all? Or sometimes you maybe want to, especially if you have one of these people who always has to ask a question about something, so maybe you deliberately leave the question, you deliberately don't answer the question they're going to ask, so that they don't answer something else you never thought of. They don't ask you for something else. But yeah, I think the pitch, a lot of it really is thinking about who's making the decision, and also sometimes it's in some extent, what's your competition, right? If you're making a business case, you're presumably asking somebody for money or resource, and presumably there are other, if they don't give it to you, it's because they gave it to somebody else. So, what are the other things, and how can you, position yourself sort of against them? I mean, not, directly necessarily, but, how, what are the other considerations for those other things?
Thank you. Simon, or do you have also the same challenges from the R&D point of view?
Pretty much. The key ones for me, on top of what Julia was mentioning, would be make sure you partner with a lot of your customers early. As you go into that pitch meeting, it should be no surprise what you're talking about to virtually everyone in the room, including the decision maker. They should have heard about it before. You would have been working with maybe some of the people that report to that person and say, hey, this is what we're trying to do. This is what it really means. And this is the importance of that project. So I find that really, really helps. I kind of echo a little bit of what Julia is saying. And I kind of flip-flop on the fence there about whether I include absolutely everything or whether I leave some questions open. But don't be afraid of questions. Questions are great. If you go into a business case and people start asking questions, that means they're interested. They've kind of got it, and then they're trying to find out more. So I would say don't necessarily be over prepared and have a brightly polished presentation. Sometimes that not polished presentation works just as well if you go in with the approach saying, hey, I've got this idea. Can you help me? Can you work with me to build this case? Even with the decision maker, that can work too.
Thank you. So now let's hear from the business side now. So Viral, what questions should be answered in the business case from your point of view?
Yeah, I mean, we have done a number of business cases over the course of my career, right? And there's a structure to them that I tend to prefer, and it's all about telling a story. And it's why are we actually doing this project? How does this align with the business, and what is the business value that we're going to get out of that project? If you're able to tell that story and you tell it, not so much in PowerPoint's verbiage and slides, but more in an interactive way, then I think that story is well received by a variety of audience that you actually need to convince, right? Because you're going to convince not only your management, but the business management, the finance, as well as the technical team that is going to be looking at this project to see whether it can be done or not. And so, given the wide variety of audience, I try to actually, and like Simon and Julia said, I try to actually meet with these individual participants of that overall committee to make sure that I actually understand what is it that they're looking for that particular business case. I try to prime them with enough information so that when we go to that meeting is more about a discussion rather than me trying to actually answer questions that I hadn't thought of. And it's a robust discussion, because in the end of the day, this is something we have to be diligent about. The business case has to produce value, and how do we make sure that it actually produces the right value for BMS? And that's the discussion that we need to have in that forum.
Thanks. Cyril, do you have a similar approach or different one in Regeneron?
Yeah, very similar, right? We always start with the question: what question do you want to ask of the data that today you can't get that answer? And we have a term we use, data jail. We're very good at getting a lot of data into systems, but not as good as getting it out. And so the researchers and scientists know that that question can be answered. They just can't get access to it. So we always start with and focus on the question, and then a standardized business case, and what value is it going to provide? What's the expected outcomes that they want to gain from answering those questions, those insights? And can we get other insights and leverage that, and build upon that as we develop solutions to answer those questions?
Thanks. So I think that's going well with one of the questions that we discussed with Julia about if there is some standard around business case, like a common procedure, a common structure that are implemented and or even shared across company to build a good business case. Do you have an internal standard already?
Yeah, we have a standard for business case, and all of our projects, have a business case where we look at, having the question, a summary, a problem statement, some high-level requirements, what outcomes we expect to achieve, what are some proposed solutions. And I think, several of the panelists mentioned that earlier. The business a lot of times has ideas on proposed solutions, or software that's out there, or technologies out there to help them solve that. What type of integration needs to occur with this new solution with other systems, and then obviously the business value statement. And again, we always focus a lot on the value statement, because that's what we communicate back to the business and how we're helping provide value and aligning to their capabilities.
Yeah, I'll sort of echo what Charles is saying, that we do have a template that we follow for a lot of the business case presentations, and the teams are now primed with this kind of a mindset. So you start with the executive summary and sort of work your way down, and people know what to expect. And like I said, it's more a discussion at that point rather than us trying to convince them that this is something that they should invest in.
Thanks. Simon, do you also have the standard that you have to fill?
Sure. I mean, that most companies that I figure would have some kind of business case standard. You have your standard project charters that you want to look out there. I suspect that most of the standard Office 365 ones closely mimic a lot of the different businesses' project charters. And then you would have we have a standard business case. We have a standard kind of format that you would deliver it in. But exactly as Viral mentioned, it's really not necessarily about the forms. It's more about that discussion and that understanding of everyone on the team as to what kind of decision we're trying to make. And the getting down to the real points of, are we just making up these numbers or are they real, and can we back them up when we actually go to that presentation to say we're going to get this technology, we're going to save 20 hours a week of a scientist's time. Someone's going to challenge that, and you better make sure that you have the data to back it up. And I would say that's a critical part.
Thanks. So I think we are now running out of time in this interesting topic. So I would like to thank you all for all your insight, and for the audience to tuning in today. And back to you, Mark. I saw you appeared already to signal the end. You're muted, Mark.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, I've not been on screen, but I've been listening to the conversation. I was particularly excited about hearing this discussion, and obviously speaking to a number of you throughout the process. You haven't failed to deliver. I think there's been some really interesting things discussed, and I'm sure the audience has learned a lot. So thank you very much to everybody for joining. Thanks to the audience for tuning in. Just a quick reminder, we will provide the recording to everybody that signed up as well, so you'll get access to that on a playback feature. Special thank you to all the panelists, Simon, Julia, Terrell, Viral, and of course Celia for moderating and keeping it on time and doing a great job. The only other thing is just in terms of feedback. So when we kick the session, close the session down, you'll have access to a survey. Please do fill it out. It does help us improve these sessions in terms of the sort of structure, the format, the topics, all that kind of information. So it is very useful to us, and obviously it does enable us to create something specific for you. So that's it from me, really. Once again, thank you very much for tuning in, and I hope we get to see you for future events. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.